I'm Warwick Ross. I'm the producer, co-director, co-writer of Red Obsession.
And I'm David Roach. I'm the co-writer and co-director with Warwick.
And Robert Coe, the executive producer.
Let's talk about the concept of the film. You got to travel to some exotic places to make this film, and I would hope you're all red drinkers. Can you talk about how the concept for this film came about?
Sure. The genesis of the idea really started on a flight between Sydney and London 3 years ago, and I was on the plane and realised that sitting 3 or 4 rows behind me was an acquaintance of mine, Andrew Caillard, who's a master of wine. And master of wine, there's very few of them in the world. There are fewer masters of wine than there are astronauts, for instance. So the level of qualification is extremely high. So Andrew started talking about Bordeaux, which was a place that he knew really well and really intimately, and I'd known for years, but only by reputation. And he began telling me that there was change happening to Bordeaux, and that despite the fact that the global financial crisis had hit and had bitten really deeply in the rest of the world, that the wines of Bordeaux had been rising at some astronomical rate and were up something like 1,000%, and that made no sense to me at all. So I asked him, how could this possibly be? And he said, China. China is the reason. So that sparked interest immediately. And he also started talking about the vintage that was coming up. The 2010 was supposedly the vintage of the century, and that what would prices do? And with China cashed up, voracious, new client, this was shaping up as sort of a perfect storm of the wine world. So that's where it began.
Traveling to China to film is never easy. How did you get around those restrictions?
We had help. We had a terrific fixer in China that set some things up for us. But surprisingly enough, we didn't have a lot of problems. Official problems. We didn't have a lot of problems with getting permits. And we were actually surprised by the freedoms that we had to shoot what we wanted to shoot. Just occasionally, we'd be shooting, for example, in Shanghai on the Bund, and we'd start to draw a crowd because there are probably 100,000 or maybe 500,000 people walking on the Bund on that day. And so if 2 or 3 of them stopped, then 100,000 of them would stop, and then the officials would move us on. But apart from that, we found that we could move pretty well everywhere. Without too much of a problem.
And the only real exception to that, where we potentially could have a lot of trouble, was in the far west of China, in Xinjiang, which is the Uyghur Autonomous Region. And there's always been civil unrest out there, and the Chinese government are particularly concerned with who gets out there, and certainly no journos and film crews. So that was the only area where we were a little bit concerned, but we went under the wing of a Chinese winemaker, and we stuck with him. The film crew, which was all Chinese at that stage, other than the DOP, and the DOP stuck with me. But the film crew went through with all of the gear, and we made sure we were separated a little bit and wandered through as tourists. So that's the way we got around it.
Did what you discovered when you went to China for the film, did it surprise you at all, what you learnt along the way?
Oh yeah. Rob, did it surprise you?
Yeah, no, it was incredibly surprising. I mean, from what we kind of followed the crumbs as well, which was what was so exciting, from France. And we saw a little view into this world of what was happening in China through Chinese tourism in Bordeaux. We were there for en primeur, and they were absolutely everywhere. And we got so excited, going, why is this sort of massive sort of downpour, and why is everyone just coming into Bordeaux? And we're seeing all this sort of Chinese influx there at the time when there's buying. And we followed it back to China, and their passion and their desire to want to learn more about this one sort of luxury good was absolutely incredible, and it's almost an insatiable appetite to want to learn more and find out more and buy more. It was absolutely incredible. I was surprised to what extent it actually did go to.
You sort of, as you're making this film, and it's a bit like a journalist following a story, as Rob said, you're sort of following crumbs and you're making connections and you're trying to figure out what the story is. And we started, while we were in Bordeaux that first time, we started to hear all kinds of stories about the Chinese, because we would say, well, who are these people? And who are these people who are spending all this money? Sometimes, for a new vintage, they'll be spending $2,000 or $3,000 for a bottle, but for an old vintage, they'll be spending up to $100,000, $150,000 a bottle. So who are these people? And so the rumours, the stuff that we got back was sort of intriguing. On one hand, people would say, they've got all this money but know nothing about wine. In fact, they'll buy this wine and they'll put Coca-Cola in it because it's not sweet enough, And so you'd hear these stories, or that they had money but no taste, or they were just buying because of the brand and they had no real understanding of how a good wine tastes or should taste. So it was important for us to go to China to sort of unpack some of those rumours and to get to the bottom of them, to find the truth of them, because I think it's very easy when you're dealing with another culture to sort of stereotype them, And there's 1.5 billion Chinese, so they're all different. And what we did find, as Rob said, we found, we found an incredible variation in people's attitude to wine. But we found, this exhilaration about, Bordeaux wines and wine in particular. It's a new thing in China, and their level of expertise, their level of education is rising so rapidly. That was the exciting thing. And the other major discovery for us was the fact that, because we'd heard that if it continues to grow, if the demand in China for wines in general continues to grow, there wouldn't be enough wine in the world to satisfy the Chinese market. So we discovered that the Chinese are actually, planting so many vines, per year, that they're going to become, the world's major wine producer in a decade or so. So these were really new things for us. And so once we discovered that, that's where we started to follow the trails out into, as Warwick said, out into the far western regions, the really remote regions, to sort of see these new plantings and so it's like the edge of the wine frontier. That was exciting.
But there's another angle to that which I found particularly fascinating. We all did, and that is that when we ended up in London interviewing people there for their views on Bordeaux, we talked to a chap that used to be a commodities trader on Wall Street, and he quit his job and started up commodity trading in wine, and he now has clients that will spend $2 or $3 million buying 20 cases of this and 20 cases of that, and they'll put it in a bond store. And 5 or 6 years later they sell it and make a huge profit, but they've never seen the wine, they don't know what the bottle looks like. And by comparison, the Chinese, when they spend that level of cash on bottles of wine, it's always to drink the wine. They don't store it and hide it and look to profit 5 years down the track. They actually enjoy pulling the cork and drinking it, sharing it with their friends. So that surprised us no end, that the Chinese probably in many respects honour the passion and the art of the wine more than the people who were investing in the West.
I believe the film premiered was at the Berlin Film Festival earlier this year.
Yeah.
How was the reception there, and are you looking forward to seeing how everyone responds to it here?
Yeah, Berlin was absolutely fantastic. The crowd there just seemed to love it, and it's always so exciting from a filmmaker's point of view to be in the cinema and just see when your film is received so well, and they just loved it there. And luckily we've got the same setup here as we did in Berlin, which is a screening followed by a fantastic dinner that's been inspired by the movie. So we had an amazing Chinese gourmet meal after with incredible Chateau Palmer wine, which is an absolute treat. And I haven't seen so many happy people in such a big room after a while. But yeah, I mean that was my take on it. I think they loved it.
We've actually just come back from Tribeca as well, and Tribeca was a blast in the way that Berlin was, and exciting, and a completely different character of a festival. But one of the things that was most exciting about Tribeca was that Robert De Niro, who of course is one of the directors and instigators of the festival, called our film one of his 2 favourite films of the festival. So we'll take that any day of the week. Thank you very much. So that was great.
That's fantastic. Congratulations on that. That is certainly a huge praise.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you.
Well, where does it go from here?
Well, we've got our Australian release, August 15. We then have a US release, September 20, thereabouts. We have a Scandinavian release after that. We have a UK release after that. I think the next 6 months is going to be filled with festivals and release pattern right around the world.
Well, best of luck with it, and thanks for taking the time to talk to me about it today.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Pleasure.